Welcome to Connections, a podcast of the JWB Jewish Chaplains Council.
Welcome back to Connections. In this third episode, we'll be hearing from Chaplain Paul Hurley, Army Chief of Chaplains. Well, good morning, everyone. We are very fortunate this morning to be joined by Chaplain Paul Hurley, Army Chief of Chaplains. Sir, good morning, and thank you so much for your time this morning. So you are our third guest podcaster, and there's a Jewish expression that says "Acharon, Acharon Habib," that the last one is the most endeared one. So yes. You have that status in our podcast today. Sir, as you know, our training this year has to do with the different roles that chaplains play. And I want to talk to you a little bit about those roles, but I want to maybe take a step back and begin by asking you, how would you define successful ministry in the Army or in the military in general?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you for having me be last, I guess. What a privilege that is.
Save the best for last.
But, actually, kind of a segue from that is, often it's hard to categorize, it's hard to measure, I think, the work that we do in general, as ministers or rabbis or priests, measuring our success, right? I mean, I always kid around about that, like, how many souls did you save today? I mean, thank God the Army isn't asking us that question, which I wouldn't put it beyond them, but, it presents, a bit of a dilemma for the work that we do. So in answer to that question, I try to be careful about not providing or not leading people down a road that they're going to try to be measuring or somehow figuring how successful they are, right? So I think really to answer that question, we really need to think more in terms of how well am I connected with my calling? Like that whole thing about why am I here? Is my life as a chaplain, is it still consistent, right, with that initial call? Or am I still living, consistently for what I believe I'm here for? You know what I'm saying? I think that's I think that's the only real way for anybody to say, I'm doing well in this work.
Right.
It's not like you're out there trying to figure out the logistics of getting a unit from A to B. Our ministry, our work, if you will, very ambiguous. So what may be successful in one unit or for one chaplain, it may be completely ludicrous for another. So our response to that question needs to be about how well am I or consistent in my original call.
Right. I love that answer because success is internal. It has nothing to do with rank or duty station or position or anything like that.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Great.
And that's part of our struggle in this environment because chaplains are immersed in an environment that wants to measure everything. They want to come up with metrics. They want to come up with, how do we figure out how well we're doing? That's a challenging area for chaplains to be in.
Right. We need to constantly remind ourselves.
Yes.
To look inward, look at original calling.
Yeah, and I think actually what you're doing too, maybe with this year-long concept, I think that in itself is connected with that question because you're trying to help the chaplains stay consistently kind of on track with what they're here to do. And I think by that continuous involvement with their endorser, you're actually contributing to their success, keeping them connected.
Right.
What's really important.
We've kind of broken down the roles of the chaplains into three things: the ritual role, the prophetic role, and I call it the rabbi as the politician, although that's not usually a positive word, and we're going to get to that. But I want to talk a little bit about their prophetic role. So we talk about chaplains having this prophetic voice. Talk to me a little bit about how you see chaplains using their prophetic voice. When should they use it? When shouldn't they use it? And how do you get it? How do you maintain it? So that's a big, long question.
Well, prophetic voice, obviously, it needs to be founded in an identity that understands prophetic voice can be dangerous. The times that we're called to go to a commander or go to a leader and say, hey, this is wrong, or you're wrong, or, this is what people need. To have the courage and the strength and the moral fortitude, do all that. That is prophetic to me. That's what that is, I think.
Right.
That's that prophetic voice, which our people need, right? Not only do our soldiers and families need prophet advocating for them, speaking for them. But our leaders also need that prophetic voice, at times challenging. And I think whether they like it or not, leaders appreciate it. I've never had actually a negative response from a leader. In my prophetic experience, it's only been well received. It's only been like, thank you for saying that.
If I may, sir, just like with the prophets of old, leaders of the people might not necessarily follow, but they always appreciate hearing that prophetic voice.
Yeah.
I always kid with our chaplains that of all the prophets, we only had one successful prophet, and that was Jonah. Jonah's the only one who told people repent, and the people repented. Everybody else told people to repent, and
even though in the end he didn't like that.
right. So you can't always get what you want.
Yeah.
So, sir, I want to just kind of switch gears a little bit now. Talk a little bit about that politician role, and the way that I'm defining that politician role is how a chaplain navigates within the institution. So we talked about the ritual role is what centers one. The prophetic role is the outward expression of that identity.
Mm-hmm.
But a chaplain still needs to operate within the institution if he or she wants to remain part of the institution.
Right.
So my question is, what advice do you give to chaplains about navigating the ins and outs, operating within that institution?
I like to think of that in terms of, from what you just kind of laid out there, in my mind, my little army-formed mind, to me, I find all of that wrapped up in leadership. So, and we need to do better as a chaplain corps in developing our people, chaplains, to be better leaders. See, and I think leadership, both development of it and exercise, that is where the action, that is where we find, or we need chaplains to be, in a sense, engaged. Engaging the system, engaging the environment. Leadership also means exemplifying how we care for ourselves. If I'm going to lead others, I think is important for chaplains. You're ultimately going to shift from strictly leading the people or the community or the soldiers and families and leaders. You're going to shift ultimately to leading other chaplains. So in our environment and in the Army, the chaplains who are in battalion levels is really where the rubber meets the road. They're the ones that are actually doing the bulk of the work. Everybody else above that is in, I think, support mode. In other words, the leadership piece becomes more important, right, as you move along in the system. And that's all about caring for people. I mean, one of our Medal of Honor recipients recently spoke about his acts that we are holding up as the example of what we want soldiers to. You know, he basically said this was an act of love. This was an act of charity. To me, that translates in our vernacular as leadership. And so leadership is about loving others. But in order to love others, we have to be able to take care of ourselves. So the political environment, as you describe it, needs, I think, leaders. We need chaplains to be leaders. It involves understanding the environment, understanding competencies, understanding how systems work, and then being able to care for others in a way that they're supported and they're taken care of. That's really leadership. You know, leadership is helping people or is guiding people to get where they need to go. Right? That's your job. And to me, that's about loving others. So it's all kind of connected, but we're immersed in an environment, in an institution where leadership is the priority. Like as an Army officer, that's really the fundamental competency, leadership. Right? The Army doesn't, I mean, we all have particular skill sets, but the Army is more concerned about leadership. And so we're in this world premier leadership force, our institution. We, Chaplain Corps, need to do better, leverage that for our people, to develop chaplains who are better leaders. You know, navigating that political environment, you need leaders. If we don't have leaders, we become marginalized. If we don't have leaders, we miss opportunities. If we don't have leaders, we don't know what's going on. So how are we going to lead? How are we going to care for others? How are we going to love for others? I mean, if we're in charge of 4 or 5, 50 UMTs, how can I do that if I'm not a good leader? And all that's involved there. So I'm calling it the chaplain identity triad. Right. It's about leadership, legacy, and love.
If I understand what you're saying, is the way to operate in this political environment is that the common language that we have with the environment that we're operating is leadership.
Yes.
That's the common language. So we got to learn that language for us to operate.
Yeah. And as chaplains, as ministers, as rabbis, as clerics, we do very well, almost naturally, in mentoring, right? Or coaching, or putting our arm around someone.
Correct.
And helping them. But leadership, I mean, those things are a part they're a piece component. But leadership is much more. Leadership is being able to help people go somewhere that they may not be able to go on their own, right? So how do we figure out, what's going to motivate them to get? Sometimes it might be coaching, but other times it may not. It may be more of a hard,
Right. Tough love.
tough love
Yeah.
type thing. But the point is, leadership is a skill, and we need to have more skill as chaplains in that area.
Right.
Leadership.
Which leads me actually to the next question, and that is, so we're asking our chaplains to really have a lot of balls up in the air,
Yeah.
fulfill that ritual role, and you're a UMT, and you're leading your soldiers, and you're leading other chaplains,
Yeah.
and we get to the question of balance. How do you How do you keep all the balls up in the air? How do you prioritize
Yeah.
to do all that?
That is, so you're touching on one of my sensitive, because I say we don't balance. I say you can't balance. I say you can balance objects, but when you're talking about a human being, I think balance is not a good concept to look at. I think integration is a much better way, healthier. So integration really, is about all those things that are important to us, right? And making them fit together. When you say you're balancing something, I think that means priorities, and that means some things are going to be more important and other things are going to be on the back burner. And I'll give an example, kind of an extreme example, but someone that goes on a deployment and has family issues when they leave, their mentality is, I'm going to put that stuff on the back burner. My priority now is this mission. I'm going to focus on that. Right? Mm-hmm. So in people's mind, they're balancing priorities. Right? It's like right now, this is obviously, I think that's unhealthy. I think, when you go to work as a chaplain, when you go to the office, you don't leave your husband or wife identity at home. When you go home at night, as a military chaplain, you don't take off your chaplain hat and never think about that, right? So I mean, these things I believe have to be integrated. So we have to work to help for ourselves and others to figure out, how do I integrate all of these things together? How do I keep them together in one whole piece, one whole package, so that I'm not misbalancing or I'm not prioritizing things. It's like, if all these things are important, I'm a husband, I'm a rabbi, I'm a soldier, I'm a whatever, I'm a son, I'm a husband. I mean, these are all important things. We have to speak and understand these holistically. And I don't, that can be a kind of trite or maybe too simplistic. But I think it's the best as far as our caring for all these important pieces of who we are as human beings. And I think when we can do a better job integrating those things, and this is a very God thing. Like, God created us to be whole human beings, and we're a human condition. We're not perfect, right? And hopefully we're growing towards a holier life. But I think like that holy life, holiness, growing more each day to be the way God made us.
I'm sitting here, and our listeners can't see your hands, but it just, when you talk about integration, I just get the feeling that part of integration also is fluidity. So maybe at some point one role is more important, but that's fluid. That's not the way it's always going to be. It just is constantly shifting, and that's part of this whole person that is always changing, always trying to adapt to the different roles.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that we don't put stuff away.
Right.
We don't put stuff, leave this at home, or we don't go on a deployment and think, I'm going to take care of my family stuff later. See what I'm saying? That's not going to work. That family problem, whatever issue, is going to remain. So it's almost delusional for us to say, I'm going to leave. I'm going to take care of that when I come home. Right? No, you're not. I mean, you can, but it's going to be worse.
Right.
You're creating more fractures. You're creating more dissonance with who you should be, I think.
Right.
So, and that all has to do with that simple concept of thinking in terms of balancing versus integrating. Integrating comes from that word integer, which is a very mathematical concept, but it means whole. It means complete. It means everything's in there. In the military world, in the Army world, you can open up a publication, an Army regulation, a DA pamphlet, or Army pamphlet, and maybe an op order, but open it up and see how often you see that word, integration.
Right.
It's everywhere. So in our world, as a military, we understand conceptually how important integration is. We shouldn't be trying to compartmentalize things. We should be integrating them more. So why do we struggle? I don't know. Why do we struggle to transfer that concept of integration into our lives as people, as human beings? And we got to stop. And my Army speak.
Right.
I'm really trying to get leaders to stop talking about balancing their lives and balancing, hey, I balance stuff. I go to church. I go to my kid's game. I go to work. It's like, that doesn't necessarily mean those things are well, you're dealing with them well. I think only through integration can you have a healthy, way of dealing with all this.
And actually, in a shout out to our reserve warriors, talking about integration, how they have to integrate their civilian life and their civilian ministry with their military duties, and then so they have one more level of integration.
Yeah, but a lot of them are better at that because they do it, right? I mean, they maybe by force, but to them, I think it's definitely more clear cut. But I think they also have, from the very beginning, figured out this is about integration.
Right.
Otherwise, they wouldn't keep doing it.
Exactly.
In fact, the ones that I know, like chaplains who drop out, especially young chaplains who drop out, this is why they drop out, because they're like, I can't find a way of making this work in my world, right, as a Catholic priest.
Right.
These young folks, chaplains, who want to do both, a lot of them that don't continue, it's because they cannot figure out how to integrate everything. And they're like, I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. I cannot try to balance these things. And it's all about that integration. So they walk away.
Right?
Yeah. So conversely, those that do continue, I think, in the reserves and guard, it's because they have figured out how to integrate those things. Not balance, but integrate. So in some ways, I suppose they're ahead of us. Maybe we should be calling on that more to help us how to better integrate.
Thank you, sir. And one last question. Here's where you get the benefit of being our third episode. Going back to the roles that chaplains play, and I kind of threw out 3 different roles, and I wanted to ask you: am I missing a role? We talked about the ritual role and the prophetic role, and then we also talked about the politician role, but that's really the military role. So Chaplain Kibben, in addition to prophet, priest, and politician, talked about colleague. And Chaplain Costin spoke about a colleague, but also a colleague to non-chaplains. What other roles do you think our chaplains play that need to come into this conversation?
I believe that's that leadership role.
Leader,
that I talked about. I think leadership, and again, to me, leadership is connected with love, with charity.
Right.
That agape. I'm going to give myself. I'm going to sacrifice my interests, my preference, in order to take care of this person. Right. Whether that's a chaplain that you're responsible, or a UMT that you're responsible for leading, or these soldiers or families, or leadership, prophetic. A prophet also needs to be a leader, right? I mean, that prophet needs to exercise leadership. So for me, I think that's the important piece. And that leadership also has to do with collegiality.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? If I'm a leader in this organization, there's an inherent responsibility to be part of the organization, right? And there's also the reality of the environment we live in or operate in is very ambiguous. This is not a synagogue. This is not a church or a parish. This is a military, and we're going to be maybe expected is not the right word, but there are things we're going to engage that nobody is going to tell us or prepare us that you're going to have to do this, right? That's why leadership. I use the example a lot of Chaplain Emil Kapan, who was a Korean War Medal of Honor recipient. And I spent time with POWs who were with him. These gentlemen I was talking to were 90 years old, but so they were reflecting on their time that time of their life. And I was always struck, I still to this day, those men could not stop talking about the impact of Chaplain Kapan on them. They're 90 years old. I mean, the Korean War was how long ago? One of these guys just retired as a nuclear physicist, right? At 90.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, he's had a very successful life, obviously, and yet he didn't bend my ear for 4 hours about his successes, in life, work, but he sure spent 4 or 5 hours talking about what Chaplain Kapan did. And to the point, to my point, I'm getting away from it, but to my point of one of the things that they were so moved by and formed, this impacted their lives. But they kept talking about this situation where Father Chaplain Kapan was the guy who would go around and pick lice off of the men who became so weak
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't do it themselves. Right? So I kind of kiddingly say, we should have a lice picking course
Right.
at the chaplain school.
Right.
This environment we operate in it's ambiguous, it's complex. It goes well beyond what any book or doctrine or manual can provide to us about what we need to do
Mm-hmm.
to be successful. It really comes down to leadership. It comes down to a well-formed identity. It comes down to love. Living a life that is authentic. And for us as chaplains, if we're called by God to be here, how can you not,
Right.
operate out of a sense of loving others as a prophet at times, but certainly as a leader.
Sir, thank you very much for your time, and in particular for your inspirational words. It really echoes in my heart what you talk about love. That probably a well-integrated chaplain is a chaplain who loves God and loves his people and loves what he does.
You know what? You just put it in the most simple description.
Well, I really appreciate your time,
Right on.
sir, and hopefully we look forward to seeing you at a future time at one of our trainings.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope you enjoyed this third episode as much as I did, and really take to heart the words that Chaplain Hurley had to say. That's it for Connections. Until next time, this is Rabbi Elson.
You have been listening to Connections, brought to you by the JWB Jewish Chaplains Council, serving those who serve.